We got it. Hello, everyone. Welcome. See most of you back, and I guess more will join during the session. Welcome back to our webinar week on microcredentials of EADTU. Please except for the speakers this afternoon. Yesterday we focused fully on recognition and the quality aspects of microcredentials. Very interesting contributions there, and today we will continue. We will continue with the institutional and national framework. So also in relation to the council recommendation and how that triggers at country level the educational institutions and the national governments to anticipate on that. So we'll have some examples from that from Germany this afternoon, from Alberta in Portugal, and also we have a reflection from the point of view of the MOOC providers, iMOOCs in Austria. But we start with a presentation by Koen Nomden from the European Commission on the latest developments there and their point of view of the microcredentials developments. So Koen, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, George. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm happy to be here and to tell you about the European recommendation on microcredentials, which in formal terms is the Council recommendation on a European approach to microcredentials for lifelong learning and employability. Now, the title shows immediately that this is indeed for lifelong learning and employability. So it has a learning focus on the one hand and an employability, a labor market focus on the other. And the learning focus is to be seen in a broad perspective, covering higher education, of course, but also vocational education training, also training by adults, whether for labor market or for other purposes. So what I will do this afternoon is to present to you this council recommendation and also the follow-up work that is underway at the level of the European Commission.
I think you're shortly muted, Koen, maybe by accident. Maybe something that a moderator of ours did, but I think you're muted. Maybe you can unmute yourself shortly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, there you are. There you are.
Done?
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
No problem. So it was adopted earlier this year on the 16th of June. I think I hear an echo, so I think some participants have their mic open. Okay. Thanks. On the 16th of June, after a period of negotiation of around half a year. So it was adopted by EU ministers, by the EU education ministers. Now we can go to the next slide. So this council recommendation and the proposal emerged in a policy context where, more and more people need to update their knowledge, their skills, their competence in order to meet, of course, the challenges and the transition challenges that Europe faces. These are in particular the green challenge, and we need to have the energy transition. Also, of course, the digital transition. More and more jobs require digital skills, and the digital skills of the population need to improve. And also in this context, there is a shortage of digitally skilled people in Europe, in nearly all countries. And of course, another element of context is the COVID-19 recovery. So we observe also a rising number of microcredentials globally. I mean, apart from these challenges. And but as we all know, the value and understanding of what is a microcredential, what does it represent, is not always so clear. There is a very wide range of providers offering what we could call microcredentials, education and training institutions, but also many parties in the private training market. And there are questions about the quality, the transparency, the uptake. And also these play a role not only within countries, but also when people move from one country to another, or when they move from one sector to another, for example, for work. In terms of policy context at the EU level, we can see the focus on micro-credentials, of course, in the context of the targets on adult learning agreed by heads of state and government, namely that at least 60% of adults should be participating in training every year by 2030 in order to meet the lifelong learning needs, but also very much the labor market needs of skilled people. And at least 78% of the population also should be in employment by 2030. This is already an old goal, of course. Now, these goals are part of the European Pillar of Social Rights Action Plan. So you have the Pillar of Social Rights, which gives in its principle one, the right to lifelong learning, to training to everyone. But also the action plan is a more concrete implementation of the social pillar and has established this 60% goal. Of course, if we look at broader EU policies, micro-credentials play a key role in the European skills agenda, in the European education area, and also in the digital education action plan. We can go to the next slide, please. So micro-credentials, as I already said, are not new. And what the Council recommendation does is that it establishes a common European approach, to how we look at micro-credentials, and in the context, of course, of their ongoing and emerging provision. So there is a lot of research, of course, that is going on in micro-credentials, and some of the questions are, is it a hype because everybody seems to like the term, but we don't always understand the same thing by the term. Also, more and more research is confirming that micro-credentials are there to stay, probably. Now, the Council recommendation covers micro-credentials itself, but also it covers policies that can support their design and use. And, very important as well, the Council recommendation does not seek to replace existing systems of qualifications. This may sound attractive in some cases, and you see this tendency also a bit in overall discussion. We don't need degrees, we need skills and so on. Okay, micro-credentials, of course, allow you to acquire a particular set of skills within a much shorter duration than qualifications, but the Council recommendation is very clear. The Council recommendation does not seek to replace normal full qualifications by micro-credentials. Okay, so it is more thought in spirit as something that you will acquire after having obtained a full qualification. Now, the Council recommendation itself contains a number of building blocks. It contains some key area for action, and it has, and I start with that, two different foci, we can say. On the one hand, education training policies, skills policies. On the other hand, it can support active labor market policies. When we look at the building blocks, there are three main building blocks, and I will come to those in particular. First of all, the Council recommendation has, and it was always one of its key aims, has set a common, we could say, European or at least EU level definition of micro-credentials. Then it has agreed on a number of standard elements for how, what characterizes micro-credentials. And thirdly, it includes principles for the design and the issuance of micro-credentials. And when we go to the key areas of action, of course, the Council recommendation says, okay, it would be good to develop ecosystems for micro-credentials. Also, it suggests that it will deliver on the potential of micro-credentials. So I will come back to that. And it provides some elements of Commission support. Now, you have to see the Council recommendation is a recommendation adopted by the Council, so by ministers, on the basis of a proposal issued by the European Commission, and it contains recommendations on the one hand to the EU member states. On the other, it contains also recommendations for the Commission, how the Commission can support member states in implementing the Council recommendation. Now, let's now go to the common definition of micro-credentials. That is on the next slide. So you see here that overall there is quite a long definition, which you see on the left. So micro-credential means a record of learning outcomes that the learner has acquired following a small volume of learning. Now, these learning outcomes must have been assessed, and not just assessed, but assessed against certain criteria that are transparent, that are clearly defined. And micro-credentials provide the learner with specific skills or specific knowledge, skills, competence, if you want to say it more precisely. And that corresponds to societal, personal, cultural, or labor market needs. So also you see the reflection here. Sorry, the definition here tries to be really broad, quite holistic, also addressing the different purposes of micro-credentials. Then next point, very important, they are owned by the learner. So this reflects the idea of self-sovereign identity. You as a learner, it's learner focus, you as a learner decide about what you do with your credentials, for example. And you can decide to share and to present, for example, your credential in another country or with another employer or wherever. They may be standalone, but, and this is a lifelong learning element, could of course also be combined into larger credentials. And then last point, not unimportant, they are underpinned by quality assurance. And then again, based on certain standards, and standards are ready, as you know, I think, in the field of higher education, but of course, also in other fields, there are other ways of ensuring quality. The private training market indeed does look at quality indeed in different ways. So on the right side, you find the keywords. I would say myself, learning outcomes is really a very key element of micro-credentials, and of course, smaller volume than full qualifications. And then the lifelong learning element combined into larger credentials, which doesn't mean that the council recommendation is saying that you should be able, to obtain a bachelor or master degree on the basis of a free composition of micro-credentials. However, this is in place in certain countries. Okay, let's now move to the standard elements. And the standard elements to describe a micro-credential really are elements that have been introduced in order to make micro-credentials better mutually understood across, let's say, different contexts. Yeah, and the standard elements that figure in the council recommendation are listed here. So they refer to the type of micro-credential, to the body that is awarding the micro-credential, again, also to the learning outcomes. Of course, the learner who obtains a micro-credential needs to be identified. The identity needs to be, checked because you need to trust that the person indeed who claims to have the micro-credential is indeed the person that has been assessed and does have the skills corresponding to the micro-credentials. Also, a standard element is a notional workload, can be there, needed to achieve the learning outcomes. So the workload is always linked to the learning outcomes with a reference to ECTS. Then also reference is made to the possibility to include micro-credentials in qualifications frameworks, if that is applicable. And we see that, discussions on how micro-credentials and qualifications frameworks articulate national frameworks in particular. Okay, those discussions are starting in a number of countries, and if this discussion takes place, it takes place, of course, in the context of trying to enhance transparency. And the type of assessment is also a standard element. How participation took place in the learning activity can be online, can be offline, and so on. Of course, dual learning, actually, you can obtain a micro-credential through whatever way of learning, according to these standard elements. And also the type of quality assurance. There is no standard quality assurance for micro-credentials across the board. There are the standards and guidelines in the field of higher education, but beyond, there is more diversity in quality assuring. And then last but not least, not to forget about the title. Then there are also a number of, and we can go to the next slide, principles for the design and issuance of microcredentials. And there you find some of these standard elements, you find them back. Quality, transparency, relevance, and so on, recognition, learner-centered, very important, authenticity check, and also information and guidance are part. Now, where do we currently stand? So, and then we can go to the next slides. And the council recommendation also advises to establish further evidence, on microcredentials, and also on its use and what can be done. And actually, in those contexts, microcredentials can of course be part of the analysis of skill demands, and microcredentials can be a response to the need to acquire specific skills within a short time. Employers usually like microcredentials because employees are not leaving work for a long period, and nevertheless they acquire targeted skills. Also, the council recommendation can of course be used as an inspiration source for how you could design microcredentials. Relevance is therefore, and I said this in the beginning, is very broad: higher education, vocational education and training, labor market, the training in the labor market. And also another element of context, quite important, is digitalization of credentials. We could imagine that within the next 5 or 10 years, you will get, if you get a certificate for a microcredential, that you will get a digital certificate, with all the information in there, the standard elements and also the principles for issuance, but the standard elements could figure in your digital microcredential. We also know that the open badge technology is used in order to issue microcredentials. And of course, they can be part of repositories, catalogs. And if they are included in national qualifications frameworks, we could imagine that they are also included in repositories or in digital registers reflecting the national qualifications framework. Then ongoing activities, a few words here, and I think that's of interest. What is the EU currently doing? Okay, I see here. Oh, sorry. First of all, some priorities for implementation, but this is basically repeating what I already said: education, training, also the labor market. Also, international organizations are quite active in the thinking around microcredentials, like the OECD. I will come back to that. And then if we look at the next slide on priorities for implementation, this very much focuses on adopting and promoting the use of the different building blocks. So the member states are really recommended in the council recommendation to adopt the definition, to adopt the standard elements, and so to work with the building blocks. And this somehow standardizes the data categories you talk about when you talk about microcredentials, because this makes it easier for microcredentials to travel between countries, but also between sectors. And of course, a priority for implementation is to facilitate the ongoing and emerging development. Now, the next slide shows a few things of action that is ongoing. And it refers to a CEDEFOP study. So CEDEFOP, for if you are not familiar with it, is the EU agency for the development of vocational education and training. And CEDEFOP is carrying out research. They have a big project on microcredentials for the labor market. And they collect evidence on how microcredentials are used on the labor market. So there was a first publication that was done, and they are now ongoing Yeah, they are now ongoing with their study, and they will have another study next year that will be published as part of the big project. So I will try to put the link to the CDFOP study in the email. Then DG Employment is working on a leaflet, yeah, which focuses also on the building blocks. So and we will publish this on the website, so this can be used by by parties interested. Then the OECD, the Commission is closely working together with the OECD and has also contracted work from the OECD, in particular also in more evidence gathering and in support for implementation. And expected outputs, for example, include a paper on microcredentials use and possibilities, which will be published as part of the OECD Education Policy Perspective series. And also there will be a short summary paper, which will also be published on, namely, delivering on the possibility of microcredentials. So this is really where the Commission has outsourced work to the OECD, because the OECD is more, let's say, the content expert, does more have the empirical evidence than the Commission itself. Then we are also working with the ETF. That is the European. That is the European. Somebody, yeah, that's the European Training Foundation, also an EU agency in Torino, in Italy. The ETF is working for the EU partner countries on the eastern and southern border of the European Union. And in particular, a project is ongoing on microcredentials for Ukrainian learners. So this is a cooperation between the ETF and the Ukrainian Ministry of Education and Science. And it invites member states, but also other ETF countries, to share high quality learning materials and courses leading to microcredentials that Ukrainian learners can use to upskill and reskill. And of course, with the purpose to rebuild Ukraine already during, but also in particular after the war. So very important also in the political developments. Then of course there is the Erasmus Plus program, maybe of interest for some of you, and the annual work program 2023 of Erasmus Plus invites to submit also projects as part of the forward-looking cooperation project. So to submit projects there on microcredentials in order to implement the microcredentials council recommendation. And the focus there is on, for example, microcredentials for a more inclusive labor market, microcredentials for the green transition. Also in this context, it's interesting that the Commission has developed the framework, the competence framework in the area of green skills. And finally, it's about portability of microcredentials. Now, one last word for 2023. So the Commission has initiated and has the intention that the year 2023 is the European Year of Skills. Proposal was made by the Commission for the European year, and that needs to be adopted by both the member states and by the European Parliament. And we hope that it will be adopted quite soon, although the year will probably not start exactly on the 1st of January, but that will also be an occasion to really get microcredentials in the spotlight as a way of acquiring skills. So I would like to leave it there and still have some time for discussion and questions.
Thanks so much, Koen. Really good update on what the Commission is all doing in relation to the microcredentials. And we see in response to the call, the Council recommendation, that some countries have already taken up the initiative of developing a vision, trying to make coordinated action at national level of coming to developing a vision, as others are maybe needing to start yet. And we as EADTU want to try also to have it more as a coordinated action, so that not everybody's discussing the same things in isolation, so to say, in their own institutions, but that we also connect what is being discussed in all these countries because we are challenged or see the opportunities altogether, and can benefit most of it when we do this within coordinated actions. So thanks, Koen. Anyone question for Koen at this moment? The chat is very, very silent.
You can either use the chat or you can open your mic and the camera. It's both options are there. So yeah, this is the chance. Oh, it's been a very clear story. That's also possible, of course.
I will post a few things also in the chat that may be of interest.
Please do, and stay with us if there maybe is another question or in relation, because we have another presentation that's linked to that. So thanks, Koen, for your presentation. And I want to announce Mareike Weiss from the International Office of Fernuniversiteit in Hagen. And Mareike is part of our project on modularization of continuing education by Microcredentials. And I'm looking for Mareike if she has the.
Mareike won't be here today. She will be. She recorded a video for us. Yeah. So we have two more speakers afterwards who will be live. But Mareike couldn't make it, so I'm going to share a video on the screen. While I'm joining, I think there's also a question in the chat, but I'm already putting it on and see if that's going to work. And if it's going to work with sound as well. Let me see.
Yeah, there was a question about the can we join the project? So so the project that I don't know what kind of project you're referring to. If you mean the project MCE, which we're going to demonstrate now by Mareike. This project is running. It's with 12 countries, and it can not be joined, but you can send messages if you want to be up to date on the developments that we are coordinating there between the countries in response to the council recommendation, and we can share the results and also the vision development of this group within this project, of course.
So I'll start with the video now, and maybe you can let me know if you can both hear the sound and see the video properly. And then it's going to start in a few seconds.
I can see it.
Hello, everybody, and happy to be with you today, even if not live. We are happy to present today within the Empower Webinar Week institutional policies on microcredentials, initial findings of a survey. Yeah, we are really happy to be able to speak to you today. Thank you very much for the invitation. And we hope to be able to share interesting findings with you. Let me first briefly introduce Fernuniversität in Hagen in Germany. It was founded in 1974. It's the only state distance learning university in Germany with a blended learning model. We are dedicated to lifelong learning. We are also Germany's largest university in terms of student numbers with 78,000 students. We are the only university in Germany whose complete programs, master, bachelor, can be completed in part-time studies alongside work or family commitments. So for us, non-traditional learners are rather the rule than the exception. The Modular Continuing Higher Education by Microcredentials project is a follow-up project of the European Short Learning Program. It's also a 3-year Erasmus Plus Cooperation Partnership project under the coordination of the European Associations of Distance Teaching Universities, EADTU. We have 10 partners involved, mainly distance learning universities. And the topics are concepts and context of microcredentials and modular education, learner perspective, and supporting institutional and political level, both on the national and on EU level. And the project only started in April this year, so it's quite new. And one of the first tasks that we conducted within our work package on institutional policies was a survey among all the partners, The partners filled it out between April and July 2000 this year. It was an online survey with live survey and open source software. Was mainly single or multiple choice questions, and it had 3 sections on institutional strategy and frameworks, on quality policies, and on funding policies. Initial results. When we have a look at institutional strategies, all of the partner strategies include terms such as lifelong learning, continuing education, professional development, innovation and learning, educational content, modes of delivery, non-traditional learners, employability, flexible learning pathways. So all these buzzwords are used in all of the, or almost all of the institutional strategies. Often the topic of microcredentials is structurally anchored at the institutions in lifelong learning centers or continuing education units. Or even in interinstitutional working groups. We have most of the microcredentials have been initiated from a market perspective or a demand-oriented point of view, rather than out of the self-interest of the teachers or institutions. Sometimes the microcredentials really correspond to the formulated needs of policymakers or companies, or they are co-creation together with and for certain employers. All institutions collaborate with partners concerning the design and issuance of microcredentials, especially on a regional or national level with employers. At an international level, is rather with other education providers. Funding is always an important topic, as we all know. University-based continuing education is often not publicly funded, though that microcredentials, the primary source of financing, are really student fees. There is some institutional and national funding, but it's mostly student fees. But when we have a look at the fees, we see a very wide range, starting from offerings free of charge, and then it goes up until 9,000 euro per microcredential, or 70 to 400 euros per ECTS. In relation to the respective cost of living in each country, almost all partners estimate that at least 50% of your population can afford microcredentials. What is interesting is that almost no partner has yet developed a dedicated business model for microcredentials. When we have a look at the understanding and the design of microcredentials, or what microcredentials could be, we see that almost all the offerings today are ECTS and EQF based, as well as learner-centered. So that corresponds very good to the EC recommendation. Only few of the offerings are interdisciplinary, and English language offerings are the exception, except for in Latvia. But that's almost all the similarities between the partners. On all of the other characteristics, we see very many differences. Sorry. For example, half of the partners primarily offer microcredentials with an academic orientation, while the other half focus on labor market or vocational learning outcomes. Half of the partners offer some microcredentials resulting from the modularization of existing programs or courses, while some also set up microcredentials explicitly from scratch. And when it comes to the legal status of learners and microcredentials, at half of the partner institutions, they have the same legal status as bachelor and master students, and at the other half, they have not. So, something of everything, so to say. And then when we have a deeper look at the denominations used so far, we have 6 partners that already use the term microcredential, but then what is meant by that is really different from institution to institution. And the most apparent is probably the range of ECTS. That's from 1 to 30, everything's there. corresponding to the hours of study from 20 to 400. The EQF level is also different. It's mostly bachelor-master level, but there are also some microcredentials on a preparatory level or on doctoral level. Half of the partners state that the microcredentials offered are stackable or mostly stackable. There's one university only offering standalone courses. And half of the partners issue a diploma supplement for a microcredential. So that's the term microcredential, really. In addition to that, there are many other designations used so far, especially a short learning program, professional course, or the certificate, along with 8 other designations used. And again, in each case, all the different designations used come along with different ECTS numbers, EQF levels, stickability options, and so on. So it's really a broad umbrella of what is understood as a microcredential. Then quality assurance is very much highlighted by the European Commission as well as an important topic when it comes to microcredentials. We see that until now, microcredentials are mostly evaluated internally only. The internal quality assurance processes are generally based on external ones for bachelor and masters, but still they are not the same unless the courses form part of bigger bachelor and master programs. Then they are usually evaluated and quality assured together with them. But then when we have a look at the, let's say, quality assurance in practice, we see a lot of similarities between the partners. Learners are involved in quality assurance at all institutions, mostly via surveys. Course material is regularly updated. Assessments are always with an identity check, regardless of whether they are on or offline held. And it's at all institutions, it's professors and other academic staff that develops and teaches microcredentials. There's only one university also offering teaching by external trainers. All of the partners have more or less concrete plans for improving quality assurance, so we see a lot of room for improvement and a willingness to improve quality assurance for microcredentials. What I also find very interesting is that 7 out of 10 partners up till now recognize microcredentials issued by other universities. But even if they do, it's sometimes contingent on certain conditions, such as that there is a clear indication of EQF or ECTS, or that there is an interinstitutional agreement. So even all the universities offering microcredentials do not necessarily today recognize microcredentials issued by others in accordance with other guidelines. What's also interesting is that the acceptance of microcredentials in the wider society and within the country is still rated as quite low everywhere. It is expected to rise, but until now it's rated quite low. Nevertheless, we see that it is a hot topic at the institutional level. All institutions have strategies on microcredentials. If they're called microcredentials or not, that's a different question, but still there are strategies or at least plans in development. What is really apparent is that there are very different framework conditions in the individual countries. And correspondingly, we see different approaches to the topic of microcredentials. We have some countries where microcredentials are explicitly supported by the corresponding ministries, sometimes even with funding, for example, in Portugal and Spain. And we see other countries where microcredentials are quite controversial in terms of higher education policy, the fear being that they might undermine full programs. In some cases, we see in quite aggressive promotion of microcredentials as part of the university strategy. Often it's also a means of financing the university. And what's also an important topic is differing legal requirements. For example, there is no other country that has such strict legal requirements for what is university-based continuing education program as in Germany. So all of these really influence, the context influence the understanding and approaches to microcredentials. So all in all, we see very different levels of political acceptance and national endorsement. We see that the national perspectives really dominate the design and understanding of microcredentials at an institutional level, as well as the institution's intentions and objectives concerning microcredentials. That might be quite anonymous. We also see that the denomination microcredentials is only one out of many used until now. So it is no standard yet, and I think it's quite a long way to go until it could be the only denomination used. So the question today is if microcredentials can become a standard for bio multinational certificates and facilitate corresponding degrees, as we see, for example, the approaches of the European Higher Education Alliances. What we see from the survey is that clearly it is needed a more precise definition than there is so far. I think the EU recommendation is a very good starting point for a definition, but it needs to be more precise in order to increase awareness and acceptance of microcredentials. So that's all I wanted to share with you today. I hope you had interesting insights and I could share with you some figures that are interesting to you. Thank you again for the opportunity to be able to speak to you within the Empower Webinar Week. And yeah, we are very happy to see how the further how we will further discuss microcredentials, the topic of microcredentials. Thank you very much. Have a good day and see you soon. Bye.
So yeah, I think so. It's a pity she couldn't be here in person now today, but I think the video was really speaking for itself. The information is really important, and this is the result only of a project that started, it was April, I believe, this year. So we can expect many more results in the coming year, and we certainly will keep you updated on that, or bring this in the next webinar week on microcredentials in the next year. And it clearly describes a picture of different levels of anticipation on the opportunities provided by microcredentials, but also, I think, bringing the different countries together and learning from each other, and also bringing the discussions to a level to a European level will certainly be helpful. Yeah, thanks, Bo, also to link the project website to that. I see there also a question about the level of microcredentials, but I think maybe we can hold that question as we have here now Diogo Casanova from the Universidade Aberta in Lisbon, who maybe can reflect on that later on after his presentation. So Aberta is one of the universities that is part of our project on MCE. So I would like to give the floor to Diogo to further.
Yeah, I'm hoping he's here already, George, because he's planned for 1500 for 3 o'clock. So it could be that he's only logging in later because we're a bit ahead of schedule now, 15 minutes.
Yeah. I would suggest then if Martin is there.
I don't think he's here either. I haven't seen him in the room. So otherwise we could have a very short digital coffee break. But I could imagine Diogo's logging in soon. So
check if there's yeah. So take the opportunity to check the website on MCE, and we will come back to you as soon. Leave the speakers on. We will come back to you as soon as Diogo arrives.
Yeah.
So have a short break for coffee.
Wil je die doen?
So I hope everybody enjoyed and appreciated the coffee break that we could create in this time frame. So we see that in the meantime, also Diogo Casanova from Universidade Aberta has joined us. Good afternoon, Diogo. He is going to talk about the adopting the European approach to microcredentials in a European context, and as part of the project MCE, which was just explained by Mareike. So, Diogo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, George. Just share my screen.
Yeah, let's see if that works. We can see it.
Yep.
Yeah,
okay, good.
perfect. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting us to present today. EADTU and George and Stefan. My presentation is to do with the European approach to microcredentials, particularly focusing on the Portuguese context, which I think it's worthwhile discussing. The MC is of course a project that we are involved as one of the partner institutions in the Universidade Aberta in Portugal. But I think there is a larger picture in terms of microcredentials in Portugal that I think it's worthwhile discussing and presenting to you all. Just some background. Important background to set the scene in Portugal. Historically, lifelong learning is delivered outside higher education. So it has been historically mainly driven in different types of agencies and associations outside higher education. And our university was an exception. So we are an adult learning institution, and we have been very much focused on adult education and on adult learners. In Portugal, the focus since the revolution has been very much in increasing the number of higher education institutions, increasing the number of degree programs, masters, bachelors, PhDs, with the national effort of increasing the number of graduates. It has been since 75. There was a creation of a large number of higher education providers, 99 of those. For the moment, of which 34 are state-funded, so they are public higher education institutions. Historically, there is little recognition for training on the job and for lifelong learning. So it's frequent for existing programs for lifelong learning and vocational training, but those are very much delivered outside higher education, and they are usually done or supported by IFVP, which is the Institute for Employment and Vocational Training, and very much on the concept of reskilling people that are unemployed and want to restart their new job in other areas, in other sectors. Microcredentials has not been a thing in Portugal until the last 18 months. And since then, it became very much a trend topic, and you will see why in a later stage. But the exceptions, I think, were very much on the UAB, the University of Aberta, because of course our historical background on lifelong learning, but also the ECIU consortium, which includes one university in Portugal, Universidade de Aveiro. They also were pioneers in the work in microcredentials. Mark Brown, I'm not sure if Mark is there, but Mark Brown has been one key agent in that regard. So before these last 18 months, only Universidade Aberta and ECIU were discussing the issues of microcredentials, and the Universidade Aberta very much on being part of EADTU, as part of the different projects that we have been involved, one of which MC. So 18 months ago, there was a new application funding available for higher education providers as part of the Portuguese Recovery and Resilience Plan. So we're talking about around 130 million euros, focusing on adult learning, and specifically the name of the program is Adult Impulse. And it's part of Generation EU, so EU Generation EU, Next Generation EU. And it's a program that started in 2022 and goes all the way to 2025. As part of this program, there is some set goals, one of which is to double the participation of adults in reskilling and upskilling programs in articulation with employers. And a second one is to increase by 5 times the number of adults in lifelong learning in all higher education institutions. So it's a very much targeted program for higher education institutions, very much focused on articulation in conjunction with employers, and very much focused on upscaling significantly the number of adult learners in working environments. So there are restrictions, one of which they have to have more than 23 years old. And so they are adult learners, but they also are part already of being, working in a sector, working in the business sector. Microcredentials were then seen strategic by the specialist panel that was responsible for evaluating this program. And so from around 30 funded applications, I think were around 33 applications, 30 of those were including microcredentials as part of their participation on reskilling and upskilling adult learners. And so it's expected by the end of the program that we have in Portugal more than 200 microcredentials being offered throughout the different higher education sector, and particularly these 30 funded applications, higher education institutions that gain this application. So the objective has the potential to reshape lifelong learning in Portugal. So we are using microcredentials to change completely the landscape of lifelong learning in Portugal. But I think one thing important to mention is, until now, it has been very much focused on higher education and the work between higher education and employers in business, not so much with the remaining sector of lifelong learning outside higher education. So the microcredentials typically have ECTS. They are recognized and they are delivered by higher education institutions. So this gives you a sense of the objective of the project. So 2021, we had around 25,000 people, adult learners doing training programs, lifelong learning. The objective is that as part of this adult impulse, we go up to 52,000 per year. And after the adult impulse, we maintain this trajectory all the way up to 60,000 by 2029, 2030. Of course, there is a discussion to have around sustainability, because currently universities are getting a significant fund to develop and deliver microcredentials. From 2025 to 2026, this funding will cease to exist, potentially. And so there has to be work with industry and with labor market to try to maintain this level of training, because obviously some of this training is funded, is supported. That will change after the project finishes. So types of microcredentials that might be also useful for you. As part of this adult impulse, we have post-graduation courses, traditional post-graduation courses, non-degree bearing. So we're talking about up to 30 ECTS per course, of around 30 ECTS per course. Then we have microcredentials, medium to long, can range from 6 to 18. Short can range from 1 ECTS to 6 ECTS. There is no clear guidance from the sector, from the national government, from the Quality Assurance Agency, from the Directorate for Higher Education, Director General for Higher Education, about length of these micro-credentials in terms of ECTS, but there is a sense that they have to have ECTS, and therefore that's the basis that we are working at the moment. Types of micro-credentials, as part of this project, they are ranging from several types of micro-credentials, several types of environments where these courses are being held. So we have courses completely in a business environment, courses in university environment. We have blended learning courses, so running both online and face-to-face. We have distance learning, which is the ones that we are currently offering at the Universidade Aberta. Our courses are fully online, but also we have after-work training. And this after-work training is very much the tradition in Portugal, where training would happen after you do your normal working day, and then you have some training either in the evening or even in the weekends. So briefly, our project, the one that was funded as part of Adult Impulse, one of the 30 programs that make reference to micro-credentials. Universidade Aberta is different from the other institutions that are part of the consortium of the program. We are the only fully distance education university in Portugal. We have a range of experience in developing lifelong learning and lifelong learning skills. Our application was nationally wide, so because we are a distance learning institution, we are able to gather students from across the country. Not that Portugal is a very big country, but it's much easier for our students to engage with training, particularly when they are on the job, without having to move 50 kilometers, 100 kilometers to a university campus. We also aimed to transform digital competencies while also developing skills specifically related to the micro-credentials that we were developing. So it's a two-on-one competence development, and lifelong learning is what we do as an open and online flexible higher education institution. So we have 2 decades offering degree and non-degree bearing courses. Lifelong learning have been always a strategic aim for the Universidade Aberta. We had around 40,000 adults already participating in upskills and reskilling courses, but this is just before micro-credentials started to happen. We have experience of working with industry and employers in designing new learning opportunities, and our average student age, both for degree-bearing courses and non-degree bearing courses, is around 40 years old. So for us, 40 years old student it's not a non-traditional student. For us, they are our traditional students. So our approach for micro-credentials started around 2.5 years ago. Also working with the EADTU, discussing these issues with the EADTU, we developed a micro-credential strategy as part of our lifelong learning unit. So it's a specific department focused on adult learning. And this micro-credential strategy had an impact in both the curriculum design and the assessment. And this strategy was independent of this application for funding from the Impulse, the Adult Impulse. So our approach is a bit different from other institutions. So our micro-credentials have a maximum of 6 ECTS. So they are short learning opportunities for our students. We made that decision because we started realizing from focus groups and from inquiring business sector that more than 6 ECTS would be demanding to juggle with professional commitments that employees would have during their experience in learning the courses that we were providing to them. So we set up a strategy of going from 1 to 6 ECTS. And for us, because it's very much focused on asynchronous learning, 1 ECTS equals 1 month of learning. So 1 6 ECTS micro-credential will be a 6-month learning opportunity for the students. And this would mean roughly around 7 hours of learning per week, which we think is reasonable for the type of students we had and we are having as part of this strategy. So we had short applicable learning outcomes, usually with low complexity, that are able to be applied on the job. And another factor that distinguishes us from others in Portugal, although it's very aligned with what we think the Commission sees microcredentials to be, is that our microcredentials are co-developed with business and with services. And this means that we currently have joint scientific coordination for those microcredentials, one element from our university that validates scientifically the content, and one from the business side that works with us to try to make the microcredential as more relevant as possible. So as part of this project, UAB Impulse 2025, our goal is to achieve in the next 5 years up to 15 new microcredentials. But this is independent of the project. As part of this project, the goal is to develop 25 new courses leading to microcredentials. We currently have 8 developed. We are working now on finalizing 5 more until the end of January. We have trained already 5,815. We expect to achieve the benchmark of 5,850 participants. We currently have 1,320. This all done in a year. So this 1,320 participants all done in 1 year. The themes in our microcredentials that were funded are distance and digital education, language and communication, tourism, and the open development goals, and climate change. So ODS is a Portuguese terminology for sustainable development goals, and climate change. The way it works currently as a project is getting funded is that participants get a training voucher and they can enroll in the university with this training voucher. So they don't pay for the course. They can do the course, and then they get the certificate. And as I mentioned before, there is a joint scientific coordination. Currently, our partners involve the police, the Portuguese Agency for Tourism, and the National Association of Portuguese Parishes, but we are currently open to enlarging the number of business and sectors that can work with us as part of this project. To finalize, I ask some questions regarding some of the findings that we are getting from this experience. We currently have, or we will have in Portugal, more than 200 microcredentials as part of this project. For now, those microcredentials are being funded. But I think the question that you can ask is, what is the future after 2025 to achieve that level of sustainability? How will the funding continue, and who is responsible for funding that? If it's the business sector, or if it's the higher education sector, or other sectors, government, for example. If all these microcredentials have a CTS, how will cross-recognition work with other institutions nationally and internationally? Who regulates this new offer? So Portugal currently has a highly regulated higher education system, but that highly regulated system does not work yet with microcredentials. So currently it's easy for a university to develop and to create a new microcredentials without having a supervision from any kind of body. And so I think it's a question to ask, and whether also the students will be able to gather all their microcredentials in one single portfolio. Again, it's another question to ask, because they may be able to develop microcredentials in different institutions, both nationally and internationally. Then there is the role for lifelong learning agencies that we have outside higher education in Portugal. Until now, they have been absent from the microcredentials discussion. I know the Commission suggests working with different sectors, and particularly with lifelong learning sector. This is a question that is not being asked currently in Portugal, where the microcredentials are being very much driven by higher education and by the higher education sector. And there is a final one on the tension between what I call the purists microcredential and the existing provision microcredential. So stackable microcredentials that are part of already existing degrees, and other microcredentials that are bespoke, developed with business, to achieve a particular goal, a particular objective. The latter may be not as sustainable as the former, but from my view, they are more puristic and they are more developed with the goal to achieve a particular outcome that may have then an impact on business and on a particular sector. So opportunities and challenges regarding microcredentials, those that we already are having, possibilities of offering joint microcredentials with other EU institutions, and this is already ongoing with different projects that we are currently working on and involved in, one of them being MCE. We are having a lot of contacts from Brazil, Portuguese. We are a Portuguese university, so we speak the language, of course, so it's easy for us to collaborate with Brazilian higher education system. And they are showing a significant interest in the area because it opens space for mobilities and for joint offers, much more easier for them than to integrate in the Bologna framework. So this is a question also to raise about the possibilities that our microcredentials open, because they are much more flexible in collaborating with other countries and with other regions of the world. There is a significant interest from the industry and from services, particularly for joint developed courses. And of course, if they are funded already by a third party, then it becomes even more interesting. And there is no regulation, and universities have until now their own autonomy in terms of microcredentials. What will happen in the end, in the future, when we have a national policy in microcredentials? I think there's a big question mark there, but one to reflect. So thank you very much. I'm very happy to engage with you in any questions that you may have regarding our project and the Portuguese sector.
Thanks so much, Diogo, for the update on in the Portuguese context. I see some questions here in the chat. How has industry recognized credentials from microcredentials? Is there high demand, high recognition from different business sectors?
So there is a high demand, but there is not a lot of information yet. So because it's not nationally regulated and it does not come yet top down, i.e. it comes top down from the funding element of it, but not from, for example, the Ministry of Economy is not as well engaged with the process as the Ministry of Higher Education, I would argue. There is not that work yet with industry. So the current industry that is engaging with us is an industry that is already part of the consortium, the different consortiums that had to apply for the funding. And in those, it's working really well. So in those, it's where I said there is a lot of engagement from industry, and there is a recognition of the credentials that are developed in higher education. More, I would argue, than previously with other types of sectors that are training. Because in Portugal, there is a high recognition of the work happening in higher education. So there is that sense of recognition.
Yeah, thanks. And I think also in relation to the business sector, we have to prevent at some point that everybody's now looking into developing new micro-credentials and standards or frameworks for micro-credentials, that if every country makes their own micro-credentials, and then also businesses sectors are making their own micro-credentials, and then even at national level, you would end up in 5 years with a great variety of different micro-credentials, and then the whole goal or objective of getting clarity and transparent vision on what a micro-credential is worth, the value of it is not achieved then. So it's really important to have the dialogue at national level and at European level to find agreements on more like broader frameworks of micro-credentials. So.
Yeah, I think that's you raise a really important question, George. Until the end of 2023, when it's expected that we have national regulation, hopefully before that, but it's the time limits, there will be a lot of micro-credentials happening and a lot of new visions of what a micro-credential is. And it will become more and more complicated to create a structure that is able to ensure mutual recognition. I would argue that the business sector will make their own decisions based on reputation of the institutions, based on reputation of the sector, based on reputation of who is responsible for designing or developing those micro-credentials. But from a sector point of view, from a higher education point of view, which is the one that I'm representing, it will become more and more complicated for ourselves to start recognizing those micro-credentials institutionally and internally, when you start realizing that there is a micro-credential in cybersecurity with 18 credits and one micro-credential with cybersecurity with 1 credit or 2 credits. That's a big range, big difference between in the learning experience and in the learning engagement as part of that micro-credential. And I think we need to be very careful in how we start looking at it from a joint perspective, because if it becomes very complicated in Portugal, which is a very small country, if you start opening up for Europe, then it becomes even more complicated.
Oh, yeah, clear. Thanks. There is a question from Matthew Hodges, our former colleague in the European MOOC Consortium. Matthew is asking about the exclusion of digital skills there. I hope you can see also the questions there, Diogo. I see the themes for your upcoming.
Yeah, I'm looking at it. It's very much on the. Sorry, let me just check something here. Apologies. Sorry, because I realized I probably didn't have the themes. Yeah, sorry. Thank you, Matthew, for picking that up. There is one theme on digital transition and transformation. So there's no digital skills, but digital transition and digital transformation. And that may include digital skills. So apologies for that. So there are 4 themes, one of which is digital transition and digital transformation. Anyway, and so elements like cybersecurity, like project management, like business analytics, data visualization, all of those are potentially part of this theme. But currently, because it's funded, it's being suggested by the business sector, by the industry sector, not necessarily by us. But there is that theme. So apologies for that. And we have at least 5, I think, 4 or 5 micro-credentials either developed or will be developed in the near future around digital transition and transformation.
Thanks. So there's another question by Ulf about the relation with the National Quality Assurance Agency and how the balance is between internal, external quality assurance in relation to micro-credentials.
So I need to be careful because the next question is from the Quality Assurance Agency in Portugal. So I need to be careful in how I respond to this question. We have been talking with Maria João Manat and with our colleagues from the agency about this issue. Currently, there is no direction from the Director General for Higher Education or from the Ministry around micro-credentials. There is no public discussion that I am aware of between the Ministry for Economy, the Ministry for Education, and the Ministry for Higher Education, which are the 3 ministries, elements of the government that will potentially take ownership of the micro-credentials world, if you want. So we have a separation between higher education and research and education and training. And so, because as Maria João says, there is no regulatory framework in terms of quality assurance for micro-credentials. Currently, it's in no man's land. And universities, because they have autonomy, they can create their own quality assurance, internal quality assurance systems to accommodate micro-credentials. And I suspect this is what currently A3Es, the agency in Portugal, is currently advocating for. The idea that universities have internally to build a system that are able to accommodate micro-credentials and they're able to evaluate the quality of those micro-credentials. But currently, externally, there is no regulatory regulation. And because of that, there is no agency that regulates the system.
No, and yesterday we had a contribution by Ankara Reflections on that indeed internal quality assurance at this moment, the main focus, it's fairly fully in line with the European standards and guidelines, and institutional accreditation is preferred in the assessment. Especially also, you can't have long time. It can't take long time for accreditation of microcredentials, as these are demand-driven, timely responses to the market needs for further upskilling and reskilling. So you can't lose years there in accreditation. I think that covers it, Diogo. Thanks so much for your contribution. Really appreciated it. And we go to our final speaker of today, which is Martin Ebner. He's one of our members of the European MOOC Consortium, iMOOCs from Austria, and he's going to give a presentation on the microcredentials introduction in Austria itself.
Yeah, thank you very much. I will try to share also my slides. Oh, indeed.
Yes, all fine. Perfect.
So. The chat will not work.
We see.
You see it already? Okay. And I put my slides in the chat, and then I will share it again. So now you should see all the slides.
Perfect. We can see it.
Yeah.
We can see it really well. Yeah.
Yeah, in the chat you have also my slides as already online. I'm talking a little bit about microcredentials in context with the example of Austria, how we implement it currently, because it's of course a rather new initiative, and we are more or less in the implementation phase and beginning to offer the first microcredentials in the beginning of 2023. But I explain you the concept in behind. Yeah, and we are coming maybe from a little bit different direction and a little bit different thinking. We are always very prominent in terms of open education resources. So our idea is that we would like also to open up the teaching and the learning, as well as via universities, and our approach is also to teach the society. And you see, for example, the first one was we have done in 2010. It's about 10 years ago now. We offer more and more open education resources. We offered a certificate for that. We begin to train our teachers in the OER sectors to give slides, teaching and learning objects to the public. Then we recognized that this is much more, and there was all the MOOCs, also the massive open online courses on the move, and we take this thought and basis of open education resources and brought it to our MOOC platform. It's imoocs.it. I come to that a little bit later. And we thought it might be very good to open up whole courses from the university, and the stuff is not only free accessible. Each course is also licensed under an open educational license. So it means that any teacher or any student, whoever, or any public member can take all the content of those courses and reuse it in different ways. And now the next step is for us, this was limited more or less to students or people who are joining universities. And currently we are thinking about that it's now also offering our online courses, our knowledge at the universities, to companies, to interested different kind of people who are not typical traditional students. And this leads us to the term of microcredentials and how we think of that, for example. Here you can see the screenshot of this MOOC platform. It's an Austrian national platform on massive open online courses. It is offered for all universities in Austria. So we have about, I think, 100 to 200 different kind of courses, mostly in German language, because of course that is traditional in our country, but also in English, and some MOOCs are also available in more than just 2 languages. And what we are offering is online courses, open licensed, and the standard is a university standard. So it means that the courses are coming from universities, from higher education, and the idea is to bring it to the public in the first run. And you can feel free to register there. You can feel free to take any course. You can feel free to take any video also for your own teaching. Yeah, and we are becoming part of the European MOOC consortium. George already introduced that. So we are one of the MOOC platforms of the European MOOC consortium. And our interest is, of course, to make common standards, to exchange within Europe, of course, to broaden and also this massive open online courses to much more than just the German-speaking area. So we would like to see that whole Europe and universities as well as companies can learn with those courses because they are high-quality standards, of course. Yeah? And you know, as this European MOOC consortium developed a micro-credential framework and published also in 2019. And the idea of this micro-credential framework is, of course, that we describe our courses more or less all the same. Yeah, so that means that the course MOOC in Austria becomes the same quality, the same standard as it would be, for example, in France or in Germany or in England. And the idea is exchange in behind, because the main problem we have currently also in higher education is that people who are just taking a course in another country, they must be also recognized in our own country to get a final degree. And therefore, we need a common description. We need common description of courses, of learning goals, targets, and we need those frameworks so that we can work on all these possibilities to exchange those courses. Yeah, and it's especially in Austria. Yeah, there is, of course, the European initiative on micro-credentials, and we have, of course, also a huge discussion here in Austria, especially of the higher education sector, because some universities don't like the idea of micro-credentials because they just say we are those who are making study programs, we are making degrees, and not just micro-credentials. They just have fears of that, and there was a huge discussion, also a statement of the government. And of course, we are also interested to be part in these micro-credentials. And you see, what the higher education sector mentioned was that they see the chance of micro-credential, especially in the context of lifelong learning. It means that it's not the typical traditional student, it's a non-traditional student who is maybe working in companies, and it becomes more and more important as we see. And we see there's an opportunity to expand, of course, our quality and as well as our general educational offers. It's a new target group, of course, for the higher education sector, and therefore we can strengthen and expand our cooperations with non-university partner institutions, mainly, of course, different kind of companies in the labor market. Yeah, and we developed a concept on that. We thought about how we can integrate micro-credentials here in Graz University of Technology. And our idea is that we are thinking more or less in modules. So we call it lifelong learning modules. And each lifelong learning module have 5 credits. Yeah, the 5 credits have 3 components. The first one is it can be, for example, an online course, a MOOC, a massive open online course, typically 1 to 2 credits. And then we are offering to deepen that what you have learned in this online course with face-to-face training at our university, for example. Yeah, so it can be an online face-to-face training, but the main idea is that people are coming to us maybe for 1 week, 2 weeks, making a face-to-face training with our lecturers, with our professors. And then we have the third component is a transfer phase. That means we would like to think that those people who had learned the theoretical part in the online course, the practical part in the face-to-face training, that they can, of course, transfer this knowledge to their own knowledge, to their companies, to their needs, what they have. And this finally have an assessment, of course. This assessment will be provided at our university, and then you get the certificate in the end, a typical certificate that you have done this training. And this training also have 5 credits. So the idea is that we are also speaking in university world, finally the credits. And of course, if you have those modules, you can think beyond that. People are collecting more and more modules, micro-credentials, if so to speak. Sometimes you combine just 3 modules or 4 modules to 20 credits, then you get a kind of course. Yeah, it would be a certificated course. And in the final end, if you are just willing to take more and more sort of those modules, you can maybe get an academic degree in the end, yeah, in a longer term. And that's also how we like to think. So that this kind of modules lead maybe to courses, and courses leads also to academic degrees in the long run. And we have already a kind of program, not as microcredentials, but as a non-traditional student program, who is defined in modules, in those modules. And you can also exchange, of course, those modules, especially to the needs of the people who are coming, because, they have different pre-knowledge, they have different situations, they have different kind of education. So what our idea is to bring flexibility into the study program in the end. And that is the concept, the theoretical concept of those models. And then we thought about how we can implement that on the technical part. And you see there is the microcredential offer. And then behind the microcredential offer, there is, of course, a payment system where you have to pay for those microcredentials. And then we have these 3 components of the module, and online we taking the iMux platform, for the online courses, and then the people have to make the face-to-face education at our university. They have to transfer face in the companies, and then they get the certificate. And the very special part, and sometimes we differ here extremely from other offers, is that you see that the online phase, the iMux course is free. That doesn't take any cost. That means that any people who'd like to register for the online course can do that. It's not, they can just simply do that. There are no costs. It's open education resources. What we are trying to combine is, again, the open education resource together with the typical face-to-face education. And only the face-to-face education, the transfer phase, the final certificate, the assessment, you have to pay for. And I was talking like books. I say the online course is a free book, and the book is, if you're just happy with the book, then you don't have to pay. That is the public part of our university. And the main idea is that you have to pay for the face-to-face education, for the trainings where you really need our personnel, our professors, our university staff. And then you get the certificate, and it's rather optional that you make a module, a university course, and you get a final academic degree. So the certificate is just a certificate done by Graz University of Technology. And that's the implementation concept, and that you can see that we have already implemented it. So the offer is online since 1st of October. You can go to microcredentials.at, for example. There is also an English version, and that is a website. And on this website, we are just offering the courses, because, of course, the courses must not have a massive open online course in the background, but it could be, for example. So we separated it from the MOOC platform. The MOOC platform is just offering the courses that we might use in microcredentials modules. And there is, we tried to also to explain it to the target group, of course, that what is very important that we see in the first run, that this is a certificate from an official university. So we have usability tests running for just 3 to 4 months. And people strictly say it's very important for them that the university says that is a university certificate, because that's only worth to be a certificate. And we also expressed, of course, that this is a combination with the MOOC platform as well as with different kind of universities. Here we tried to explain people what are credits, because typically if you're just not, you've done your study before 2000, you don't know what are credits, because even I get just as a final certificate of the university and have no ideas of credits. We explain them how long, for example, those online courses are taken, how much time they will need. typically we are telling them 5 weeks for the online course, for example. There are 3-4 weeks for the face-to-face education, which must be reserved at the university, and there must be a final examination at the university. And this kind of graph we will put to every offer we have, so to each micro-credentials, because of course it can differ from course to course. Our first 2 offers are already online. You can see there is one on sustainability management. And our idea is that we just educate people for sustainability management in their companies. And this will start on 16th of January 2023. And language in this term will be German. It will be more or less for our local companies. And we have a second offer online already. It's a power system protection, and this is an English course, for example. And the interesting thing about that is that the face-to-face education will also be online, because we know that not only few people in Austria will be interested in that. So that is a really international offer, yeah. And both are using massive open online courses in the background. That's the idea. Yeah, if you click on the course, for example, you get more information on that. So we expect about, for example, 10 weeks, 5 credits, 125 hours on workload. We just take 20 participants. That's because of the restriction of the face-to-face education. We also, you see, we are trying, you have to pay for that, 2,100 euro for these 5 credits. Yeah, and additionally, you can go to imux.at. There is the online courses, and you will find there the online course. The online course, you can just register. You can do that right now. That's for free, and that's just the online part beforehand of the whole micro-credentials. So this part can be free, and of course we have also the idea to advertise within the course that you also can get a certificate for them valid by the university if you are interested in that. Yeah? But this is just the online course which will be used as theoretical part in the micro-credential offer. Yeah, this is my last slide. This is before you love to answer your questions. Is the summary is that we have the content is open education resource. The teaching we are doing with MOOCs on imux.at, and the certification is finally the micro-credential part. Yeah, and of course you see that is a circle, and that's the idea how we are thinking currently about micro-credentials. And of course we are currently in a first phase, so we are just trying if this concept is going to fly, yeah, and can work, but that would be a good thing, how we also can use open education resources and have a business model in the background. Yeah, that was my last slide, so I'm very happy to answer your question. I'm just stopping my sharing. Thank you very much for the attention.
Thanks very much, Martin. That was really a good example on how it is really being implemented and brought to practice, and then we can get a vision and how the mainstream in future will look like. Also, you see very developments like we are calling, refer to the face-to-face part will be online. This is really a new development, but we fully understand what is meant by that. And it's also interesting to see that so imux is one of our members of the European MOOC Consortium, and we very much support the developments of micro-credentials in line with the common micro-credential framework, and we collect those also visible on our European MOOC platform that is linked with the European MOOC Consortium to find the offerings under CMF. So it's really nice to see we have these 2 offerings there also from imux. Let's go to the questions now. There was not so many questions there, but there was a question on what does the phase transfer mean?
Yeah, so the main idea is that people are just have a theoretical part in the online course. They have the practical part in the face-to-face education, and the transfer phase means that they just take the new knowledge and bring it to their own companies and make a little project on that. So that this have a really practical part and a part which really fits to their needs. Yeah, that's the main thing, because we are thinking that we are people collecting from different kind of companies. Yeah, and they have a different kind of background, and they just should take their knowledge, bring it to the companies, make a little project on that, and that is the transfer phase. Yeah, that means that we'd like to transfer the knowledge directly to the companies, to the labor market, and then there is a final assessment, and that's the idea of this transfer phase. Yeah, as a practical project with the company.
I think all very, very clear. Any other questions for Martin? Then I thank you also, Martin, for your contribution, and also the other contributions from this afternoon. Thanks so much. That was really enlightening also on the institutional response to the call in relation to the Council recommendation on introducing microcredentials. I just want to refer, especially also for those who were not here yesterday, that we have also in line with an action line from the European Commission on the European Digital Education Hub, that we organize clinics. These are one-on-one sessions with a microcredential expert, and you and your colleagues on the topic of microcredentials. And it doesn't matter how advanced you are in that or not. You can bring forward any questions on microcredentials in that dedicated session, and I believe my colleague will put the link there for registering for these clinics, and then we will be in touch for a fit date. So these are free sessions that you can sign up to. So it's highly recommended. They will take place still in December, but if not possible for you in December, we can still organize it in January. Just let us know. And that leaves me with referring to the final day of the webinar week on microcredentials, which will be tomorrow, also at 2 o'clock. And there we are going to focus on the employers and learners perspectives about microcredentials. There we have examples how to collaborate with the labor market, but also we have a contribution on the learner's perspective on microcredentials. So that would complete our vision, our context on introducing microcredentials. Thanks again for the speakers, and also for those for you who are attending today, and hope to see you back tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock.
The access link will be the same for tomorrow, so you can use the same Zoom link. So hope to see you again at 2 o'clock tomorrow. So, yep.
Have a good day.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.